I'm Sarah, a 46-year-old single mom whose cheating ex-husband died in an accident, leaving behind not just our traumatized daughters Lily 17 and Chloe 15 but two secret sons from his affair partner who also passed away. Enter Margaret and Frank, my 80 and 78-year-old ex-in-laws who de-weaponized their church's piety to paint me as a heartless villain who abandoned surrogate babies while secretly fighting for custody of my girls and trying to seize my home. The final straw: Margaret's Facebook smear campaign that sent her zealot friends to ambush Chloe at the market on her birthday, cornering my trembling child amid artisanal cheeses and sunflowers while accusing her of killing her father by exposing his affair. That night, as Chloe's half-melted birthday chocolate stained my kitchen counter, I scrolled through Margaret's lies, claiming the mistress was a surrogate, that I'd rejected the boys. Now listen, this is gonna get messy. I want to warn you all right now. This story comes from a reader. Names have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. This happened in Texas. Please enjoy. It's gonna be a wild ride. Let's start at the beginning. Our story begins with our dear protagonist Sarah. She's 46 years old, recently divorced, and she's raising two teenage daughters on her own. But she's got a big problem because her ex-husband, who happens to be a wealthy landowner, died unexpectedly. And now his family, specifically his mother, Margaret, is coming after Sarah. And they want more than just her share of the inheritance. They want full custody of her kids. But why? Why would they do such a thing? Well, it turns out that Sarah's ex-husband had a secret. He had two other kids, not just with Sarah, but with another woman. His name was Stephen. And when he died, he left behind a will that gave Sarah a huge chunk of his estate. So Margaret, being the savvy businesswoman that she is, decided to use her status as a devout Christian and head of the local chapter of the Jesus Lovers to manipulate people into doing her bidding. She convinced everyone that Sarah was a bad person, like really bad, like she killed her own children, bad. And then she went to court to try and take Sarah's kids away from her. And guess what? It worked. Those crazy Christians took the kids away from Sarah, and now she's alone in her mansion with nothing but her thoughts and a lifetime of regret. Or maybe not. Because turns out there's a twist in the story. Turns out those same Christians didn't get the kids because they cared about them. They got them because they wanted the money. Yeah, turns out Margaret was after Sarah's money all along. It all started when Sarah's ex-husband, Thomas, died in a car accident. He was only 49 years old. Sarah was devastated, but she was also shocked to discover that he had two other kids, ages 3 and 5, with a woman named Mary, and Thomas had kept secret. And then there was the will. Thomas had left everything to Sarah and the girls, including his $20 million estate. Margaret and her husband, Frank, thought that was unfair. After all, they were Thomas's parents and Mary and was just a gold digger. They had raised their grandsons, Brandon and Trevor, since they were babies. So they should be the ones to inherit Thomas's fortune. Of course, they couldn't say that they wanted the money because that would make them look greedy. So instead, they came up with a different plan. They started talking to everyone in town about how wonderful they were and how much they loved their grandchildren, Brandon and Trevor. They told everyone that Sarah was a bad mother who didn't deserve her kids. And then they started going to church events and fundraisers, always talking about how they were raising money for Brandon and Trevor's future. Soon enough, everyone in town believed that Sarah was a horrible person and that Margaret and Frank were these saintly grandparents who were just looking out for their grandchildren. And once everyone believed that, it was easy for Margaret and Frank to convince everyone else to do their dirty work. The first thing they did was file for custody of Brandon and Trevor. They said that Sarah was unfit to be a mother because she had tried to commit suicide twice and was seeing a therapist for depression. Sarah was devastated. She had never attempted suicide, but she had seen a therapist for depression after Thomas died. But before she could fight back, Margaret and Frank had already won. The judge gave them sole custody of Brandon and Trevor, even though they lived in another state. Then Margaret and Frank started harassing Sarah. They called her constantly, sometimes in the middle of the night, just to yell at her. They showed up at her house unannounced and demanded to know where she was. And they even hired a private investigator to follow her. Sarah was scared, but she didn't know what to do. She couldn't fight back because she had no money. Margaret and Frank had made sure that she wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer. But then something happened that made everyone finally see what Margaret and Frank were really up to. One day, one of Margaret's friends called Sarah and asked her if she knew about Marianne's death. Sarah was confused. She didn't know what Margaret was talking about. But then Margaret's friend told her that Marianne had been found dead in her home. She had apparently taken her own life. Sarah was shocked. She hadn't heard anything about this on the news. And she wasn't close to Marianne, but she still felt bad for her. She had lost 2 kids in 1 year. It must be so painful. And then Margaret's friend told her something else. She told her that Marianne had been planning on suing Thomas's family for child support. She had 2 kids to take care of and she needed money. And then she dropped a bombshell. She told Sarah that Margaret and Frank had convinced Mary and to give up the kids. They had promised her that they would take care of Brandon and Trevor and make sure that they had everything they needed. They had told her that they didn't want any more drama and that it would be better for everyone if they just let go of the kids. But then something strange happened. After that conversation, Margaret and Frank suddenly stopped harassing Sarah. They even stopped calling her altogether. At first, Sarah thought that maybe they had finally realized that they had been wrong and that they would leave her alone now. But then she learned the truth. One day, Sarah was going through her mail and she found a letter from the court. It was a summons for her to appear in court. In the case of the adoption of Brandon and Trevor Thomas, Sarah's heart sank. This was it. Margaret and Frank had finally managed to get what they wanted. They had taken her kids away from her. But when she got to court, she learned something that made her blood boil. Margaret and Frank hadn't adopted Brandon and Trevor. They had simply become their legal guardians. But why? Well, it turned out that they had convinced Mary and to sign over her parental rights. She was exhausted, depressed, and had no one else to turn to. So she agreed. And now Margaret and Frank were officially Brandon and Trevor's next of kin. They had the right to make decisions about their lives, including where they went to school and what medical care they received. And on top of that, they were getting 75% of all the money that the boys would receive from Thomas's estate. Sarah was furious. She knew that Margaret and Frank had taken advantage of her sister-in-law and now she was determined to do something about it. She hired a lawyer and started fighting back. And the more she dug into the situation, the more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep this conspiracy went. Margaret and Frank weren't just after her kids, they were after her money. They had been planning this for a long time and they had used every trick in the book to make it happen. But Sarah wasn't going to let them win. She fought back and eventually the truth came out. Everyone in town learned that Margaret and Frank had been lying to them. They weren't the saints they had pretended to be. They were just selfish, greedy people who would do anything to get what they wanted. And in the end, Sarah won. She got custody of her kids back and Margaret and Frank lost everything. I know this story ends happily, but I can't help but feeling like there's something wrong with me. I mean, I laughed while reading it, but I shouldn't have, right? Like, come on, someone lost their kids and then their life savings. But then again, karma is a dish best served cold. And this story was like ice cream, extra sprinkles. Do you know what I mean? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.